Alright, so today we're going to pick off where we left off, which was talking about structure and the individual body parts. So now we're on to the shoulder. So the horse's front legs carry about 65% of their weight. So the majority of their weight is on the front end. And so whenever we're looking at a horse and considering conformation, this should be a big area that we're looking at because it is super important if you want the horse to stay sound. So we're gonna start up here at our top with our shoulder. So the shoulder is going from our point of the withers up here, all the way in a straight line down to our point of the shoulder. You want the shoulder to be long because the longer it is, the more muscle can be attached to it, and the more muscle there is, then the stronger and more powerful it's going to be. You never want a shoulder that's shorter than the horse's head. So looking at Cheyenne's head length in comparison to her shoulder length. So now we're going to look at the slope of the shoulder. So the slope of the shoulder is what angle it's sitting at. If that angle is higher or if it's lower. So the way that you would measure this is with our angle of the shoulder and then going straight across the horizon. And we'll show you a picture to see better what that looks like. But you want that shoulder slope to be between 45 and 55 degrees. So on the higher end of that side, if you're closer to 55 degrees, the horse is going to be able to lift their knees a little higher, and so that would be better for jumping horses or horses that are gaited, where they want them to really move their legs around a lot. For, say, dressage, where a horse has to really stretch their legs out and do a lot of movements with the whole body, they want lower knee action, and so they'd want the shoulder to be more laid back, so they'd want it closer to that 45-degree angle. If the shoulder is outside of that range, though, it's not a good thing. So if the shoulder is too laid back, if it's below 45 degrees, then you can have issues with saddle fitting because the shoulder is going to be sitting way back here where your saddle is. So that can be a real issue when it comes to finding a saddle to fit a horse if their shoulder is that laid back. The one exception would be draft horses because they have to wear a collar when they're pulling. It's actually a good thing for them to have a really laid back shoulder because that gives them more surface area to wear a collar. On the other end of that scale, if you have a shoulder slope that's too high, if it's above 55 degrees, then the horse is less able to absorb the impact through its legs, and so you're going to have issues with them becoming unsound and being lame because their shoulder is hitting the ground at a more abrupt angle. So now we're going to look at the humerus, or the arm bone. So the humerus is from our point of the shoulder and goes across to our elbow, which is right about back here. So it's the one right below the shoulder, connecting the shoulder all the way down to our elbow. So the humerus actually controls the movement more so than the shoulder does. So the longer the humerus is, the more scopy a horse is, so the more they're able to move their elbows away from their body. And that's considered a really good trait regardless of what you want the horse to do. It's good for jumping, it's good for dressage, it's good for roping cattle, it's good for everything. And so you always want a horse to be more scopy. So the longer that bone is, the better. So then besides the length of the humerus, you also want to look at if it's vertical, going upwards, or if it's horizontal, going sideways. So the more vertical it is, the higher a horse will be able to lift their knees. The more horizontal it is, the less able they are to lift their knees. So that's really going to depend on what job you're asking the horse to do. So for some disciplines, you want them to be able to lift their knees, and for other ones, you don't. So that's something where there's not really a better version if it's vertical or horizontal. It just depends on what you're going to do with the horse. So now we're going to talk about the hindquarters. So this doesn't carry as much weight as the front does, but whenever a horse moves, the movement starts in the hindquarters. So it's still a very important piece when looking at conformation. Unfortunately, you can't really determine the specific angles. Because horses shift so much, just a slight shift of their body can really change the angles of their hind legs. When you're looking at the hindquarters, we're not going to measure those specific angles the way that we did with the shoulder. But there are a couple things in general that are good. So the first thing would be that a horse has a long hip. So the hip is measured from our bone right back here at the end of the hip up to the front of the hip bone here at the point of the hip. So you can see it goes from there all the way back here. The longer that is, the more power a horse has. The more muscle can be attached to it, the faster and stronger a horse can go. So thoroughbreds usually tend to have the best, longest hips, and that's what Wendy is here. So she has a very good hip length. After the hip, we have the femur bone. So the femur goes from our back of the hip here all the way down here to the stifle, which is where the knee is. So it goes in an angle like that. And again, you want the femur to be as long as possible so that the most muscle can be attached. The longer that is, the more the horse will be able to move the lower leg, because that's the bone that swings the leg forward. And then the last one we're going to talk about with our hindquarters is the gaskin. So we have a couple bones that go from our stifle area all the way back here, and you actually want those to be as short as possible. The reason for that is just because these bones actually carry the most pressure. Just the way that the horse is angled, these bones carry a lot of pressure and they are more likely to get injured or broken. So the shorter that they are, the stronger they are. So you want a long hip, a long femur, and a short gaskin. We're going to look now at the lower legs on the front and the back. So you want the legs to be straight, but not too straight. So there should be a line that you could draw straight down the leg all the way through it. So this means that it's all perfectly angled, the bones are all perfectly aligned. But when I say you don't want it too straight, I mean that the joints themselves should still be very visible. So you have your knee joint here that's very round, very visible, and then you have your fetlock joint down there that's nice and round and visible. So those are good, solid, strong joints, and you can see them, but the leg itself is still straight. So from the front, you should be able to do the same thing. You should be able to draw a line from their shoulder joint all the way straight down the limb. So when you're going to draw the straight line on the back, you want to go from our end of our hip bone here, that bony part. It's going to go straight down from there, through the hock, and then all the way straight down to the ground. So lastly, we are going to talk about the head. And the head is actually the least important piece when it comes to the overall conformation. There's actually a saying, and it's called, "You don't ride the head." So because of that, it's not as important as the rest of the body. Normally, people want a head that's very refined, where you can very visibly see all the different pieces, but that doesn't really necessarily make the horse better or worse to ride or train. It just looks prettier. There are, however, a couple things that we do want to consider when it comes to the head. Firstly would be the eyes. And that's just because a horse's eyes don't really change in size, but they can appear smaller or larger based on how far they go into the head. So on some horses, they will actually be pulled more inward, and on some horses, they're more outwards. You want eyes that are more outwards, where they look large, because that's going to give the horse better vision. They're less likely to be spooky because they can see more of their surroundings. The profile of the face is when you're looking at the side, and it refers to the different shape. So horses can have 3 different face profiles. One would be a concave or dished face, as you can see on the left. In the middle, we have a straight profile, and on the left, we have a convex profile, which in horses is known as a Roman nose. Normally, a Roman nose is considered a bad trait, although it is allowed in certain breeds.
Muscling is also a consideration when evaluating the horse, though not nearly as important as balance and structure. The quantity, quality, and distribution of the muscle are evaluated when looking at the horse from its sides, front, and back. Muscling will vary based on the genetics as well as the training and fitness of the horse, but as a whole, it should be symmetrical, even, and not bunchy. Uneven muscling can be an indication of pain or injury. When caused by injury, the muscle becomes less elastic and limits the range of motion in the limb. This would be a type of pathological fault caused after birth. Certain breeders try to make horses as muscular as possible. This is a quarter horse stallion that is 16.3 hands tall and weighs 1,800 pounds. As a breed, the quarter horse is more heavily muscled than other breeds, but this is an extreme and unhealthy example. This horse is not at all athletic because his tight, bunchy muscles have limited range of motion. His skeleton is also carrying extra weight, which can lead to joint problems. A horse that is properly trained and ridden will have a different muscular appearance than a horse that is not. The horse on the left has a weak neck, indicating that it is not ridden correctly or frequently. The horse on the right has a well-defined top line and long, even muscling, indicating that it is ridden properly. Both horses are well cared for and are a healthy weight, but their muscle development reveals how they are ridden. Breed character, or type, refers to how well a horse represents its particular breed. Most breeds have unique qualities by which they can be identified. Looking at these 3 horses, you will notice that although they are all the same species, and all have the same number of bones, and are all the same color, each breed looks distinctly different. This is because their bone structure and their type is different. Now we are going to look at the most common types that horses can be. These types are very specific and unique and have been used to develop other breeds. Arabian type of horses have very unique and extreme features. Everything about Arabians is delicate, refined, light, but also strong and tough. The breed developed in very hot climates where they would often have to travel 50 to 100 miles between rest stops. Because of this, they are well adapted to the heat, are very fast, and have incredible stamina. The dished or concave face allows these horses to have a larger sinus cavity, which monitors air temperature before it enters the lungs. The long arched neck allows the windpipes to have more room, which equals better breathing while running. The flat-looking, level croup allows the Arabian to have a longer stride and run faster, although it does limit flexibility. The thoroughbred was developed originally from Arabians, so the 2 types do share some similarities. The biggest difference is that thoroughbreds are created to run shorter distances, faster. They have a deep chest to allow plenty of room for their heart and lungs. They also have long legs, long necks, lean bodies, and high withers. Quarter horses are the polar opposite of Arabians. They were developed to run extremely fast, but only have stamina for very short distances. Because of this, quarter horses are very strong, sturdy, and muscular. They usually have hindquarters that are very large and muscular to propel them forward at great speeds. Besides being fast, this type is also very agile with sturdy bones. This makes them the ideal horses for working cattle on a ranch. Warm bloods are a cross between light-boned thoroughbreds and Arabians with heavier, stronger draft breeds. Because of this, many people consider the warm blood to be the ideal competitive horse. They have the strength, stronger bones, and docile temperament of the draft breeds, mixed with the speed and agility of the lighter types. Gaited horses were bred for comfort and exaggerated, showy forelimb action. There are many different gaited breeds, each with their own particular gait. Gaited horses have conformation that allows them to cover distance with lots of knee action while keeping the back relatively still. These horses typically have lower pastern angles and a flatter croup. The neck is typically higher and more compressed. Draft horses are known for their power and calm, willing temperament. Their hip set is different from other breeds in that the legs are not straight when viewed from behind. The hocks often rotate inward to provide leverage for pulling and pushing. This is called being cow-hocked. This lowers their length of stride, but it does provide greater power for pulling. Travel refers to the way of going of a horse, or how they move. Straight limbs and ideal proportions allow a horse to travel straight with maximum range of motion and fluid movement. Structural faults or deformities result in asymmetrical movement, impacting the length of stride and potentially causing interference. Interference means that as the horse moves, one leg hits another. Brushing is when the hind hoof strikes the opposite front foot, and this is most common at the trot in toed-out horses with a narrow chest. Forging is when the hind foot strikes the front foot on the same side of the horse. Forging occurs when the front foot does not get out of the way fast enough and can be due to inadequate fitness, improper shoeing, or conformation faults. Watching a horse walk and trot from the side will allow you to see if the horse is tracking. The hind foot should, at least, step into the hoof print left by the front foot on the same side. A horse that does not track up may have conformational faults that limit the range of motion, such as a long back. Overtracking means that the hind hoof is landing further forward than the front hoof print. This is a very desirable trait and makes the horse smoother to ride.